All right, let's get started. So we do a recurring series called Founder Stories, and the opportunity is to hear from founders about their journey, their experience running a company, starting a company, growing a company. Tonight is a little bit different for me personally, because this founder I have known before he was a startup founder. He actually posted on LinkedIn a little bit about our history together. We can get into that as we go through the how you got here story, and we won't tell all the stories, especially because your wife is here. No, nothing like that. Seriously, it's all good. It's all good. So Tony and I have known each other for a really long time. So this is a story that's near and dear to my heart, based on some of the things we'll talk about. But more importantly, if you guys know how founder stories and how some of these things go, we're going to start off by talking about your journey, like how you got to the startup world, like how you got started, kind of where you went to school, where you're from, all that good stuff. We'll talk about your experience with your company, plural companies. But then I got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about. What I have observed, one of your passions about being a startup founder is, where I think as an ecosystem, we might be missing a little bit right now. I talk to a lot of founders that might have a gap or might have some challenges in the space, and it's specifically around customer feedback, customer validation, like that early product market fit kind of thing, and how you approach that and kind of your beliefs on that. So I'm excited about getting into this. I know you're passionate about some of these things, a lot of these things, and so I just want to kind of dive right in, and I wanted to set that up for everybody. I don't introduce guests, so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, tell us a little about who you are, that kind of jazz. So jump in, man.
Sweet. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, it is fun to sit up here. So my name's Tony Caudill. I'm a KC boy through and through. My dad was in the military, so I'm a bit of an Army brat. I was born at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, 101st Airborne, but I went all through school here in KC. Grew up in Independence, went to high school at William Chrisman, all those good things. So Kansas City is near and dear to my heart, and excited to be part of things like this to help move us all forward. Like I said, went to high school at William Chrisman, started my college career up at Northwest Missouri State in Maryville. Yeah, go Bearcats. Though it's funny, I went to my freshman year up there, and I always like to say they did not invite me back after that. You may not actually know this.
No, I didn't know this. This is good. This is good though.
Yeah. So I had a really good time, I've been told, and just all the things. I just went sideways, and they suggested I not come back. So
it's weird how that works.
Yeah, it is weird. So then I ended up begging my way into UMKC. And thankfully I did, because yes, that's where I met my wife. She's here tonight. And I, so ended up going to the business school there, kind of wrapped it up, and we can jump into the career side of things. But
yeah, so all right, first job out of college.
First job out of college was at Accenture, Anderson Consulting at the time, which is where we met. So actually I'll tell a quick story, because this is one of my favorite stories about myself, which is kind of weird to say, but so I did an internship at General Motors Fairfax plant here in Kansas City between my junior and senior year of college, high school. Nope, college. Wow,
now we know why you didn't get invited back.
Yeah. GPA was not my strong point.
Yeah.
So I did a internship at General Motors between junior and senior year of college, and I got paired up with another intern. Her name was Christine, and Christine's best friend got a job at Deloitte. And I had literally never even heard of Deloitte before. I had no idea what it was or what they did. But I started talking to this girl, and all I heard from her was every Monday morning she got on a plane, flew to a different city, got to stay in these amazing hotels, got to eat dinner at all these amazing places. And that was like all I needed to hear. I was like, oh my gosh, that's the life that I want. I want to be hopping on planes and doing cool things. So I went to UMKC and I said, I've heard about this Deloitte place. How do I get a job there? And they basically laughed at me and said, they don't hire people like you. And I was like, okay, that's great. But they said that there was a professor there who had worked at Anderson Consulting, which is a competitor of Deloitte. And I said, all right, well, how about Anderson Consulting? They said, no, they don't hire people like you either.
Same problem.
Same problem. Yeah, you're just the wrong caliber of person. And I said, well, do they come here and do they recruit from UMKC? And she said, no, but they do recruit at KU. And so I got online and I figured out when the career fair was at KU. I drove my 1979 Mustang out to Lawrence that day, had my suit on, my tie on. I show up at the KU career fair. I stand in line that was like 50 people deep because everybody wanted to work there at that time. And I get to the initial screen person and I'm chatting her up and it went pretty well. She said, hey, can you come back? We have a hiring manager here today. Can you come back in like 3 hours? And I was like, of course I can do that. So I burned some time in Lawrence. I go back at the time that she gave me. I sit down with the hiring manager and he's asking me a few questions and he's looking at my resume and he's just got this confused look on his face. And he finally looks up at me. He goes, dude, like, do you even go to school here? And I said, I don't, but however, I do go to UMKC.
Yes.
And I drove all the way here. Like, I really want to work at Anderson Consulting. And he looked at me and he was like, he's just like laughing at me at this point. He's like, I'm really sorry, man. We only recruit from KU. And I was like, no, but like I took the initiative to drive out here. I'm sweaty
but
because
there's a K and a U in the name.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta help me out here. And he was like, no. And so I said, well, is there a skill that if I had a skill, like a specific thing, like what could I go do right now that would change your mind? And at the time, Java was the hot skill. He said, if you knew how to code Java, I would hire you right now. We can't hire enough Java developers. And so I literally left there, went home, got online. I enrolled in a Java class at Longview Community College. I went and showed up, I think like 3 or 4 times to that Java class, just enough where I was like, okay, I feel like okay about putting this on my resume. I put that I could code Java on my resume. I sent it back to the recruiter and they called me within a week and then they ended up hiring me. And I never once coded Java ever at a day at Accenture, but that's all it took, to get me hired there. So
you're just like a big con artist.
I took the class. Man.
Okay, all right. Yeah, that's fair. You paid for the class. You took the class.
I paid and took the class.
I did not know that story about you.
Yeah, true story. Yeah.
So this is what entrepreneurs do, right? This is that grit, like that. Yeah, I'm gonna get it done no matter what, and I'm gonna. Yeah.
You just got to find a way. I mean, you got to do whatever. Yeah, and I did not grow up considering myself an entrepreneur. There's people out there that say they were sort of born to be an entrepreneur. I do not consider myself that way. But I think it is things like that where I look back in hindsight and I was like, oh no, maybe you were, you just didn't know it.
All right. So now I do want to ask you this though. So you loved working for Accenture. I know that. Like that was just a great experience for you all the way up until the very, very bitter end. What about that experience prepared you for kind of that next chapter in your life, that startup chapter that you jumped into?
Yeah, Kevin's right. I literally cannot say enough good things about Accenture. It took me places mentally, physically, and emotionally that I just literally didn't even know existed. My dad is an electrician. I just did not grow up in this world at all, and so it taught me a lot. But what I think it did was, I would literally get phone calls on Sunday nights and say, show up at this place at this time with little to no direction, and you're just expected to figure it out. It's like show up, introduce yourself, have the confidence, shake the hands with your new client. Kevin was my first official client that I had at Accenture, and you were just expected to figure it out. And I always say that like Accenture has figured out how to hire that kind of person that just has the ability to walk into a room and grind it out and figure it out and make a relationship and make an impact. And so it trained me to do that somehow.
So Tony and I jumped on a plane every Monday morning. It was back when Midwest Express was still a thing. I don't know if you guys remember the airline Midwest Express. I hope some people are nodding. The older people are all nodding their head. Yes, good.
They had warm cookies.
They had warm cookies on every flight. Like they would bake them in the plane, and like you could smell, like the whole plane smelled like warm chocolate chip cookies, and then they would give them to you. And I would always ask for other people's, like, are you not going to eat your cookie, please?
I got to know the flight attendants because they were like the same flight attendants back and forth.
So that's what I was going to say. Is what you don't realize is,
Yeah.
So we jumped on the 6 a.m. Monday flight, and then we came back on Wednesday nights, and it was funny because we flew in and out of the same airports, and we would go to the same like bar in the airport. And we knew the bartender at the airport, like we were regulars at the airport bar. The flight attendants are all on the same schedule, right? So we would get on the plane Monday morning. They'd be like, "Hi guys, like, do you want to sit in the same place or whatever?" Like it was that kind of experience. I would say this though, like business travel taught me that airplanes, taxis, because there was no Uber then, rental cars, whatever, hotel rooms, conference rooms, they're all the same in every city. Like it doesn't matter. You have to find a way to, like, business travel is not what a lot of people paint it to be. Like it's this glamorous, glorious kind of thing. You have to find the native thing. You have to find the things that are unique about that city and go experience them. Otherwise it's just a grind. You're just doing the stuff you do here on an airplane. And I hated it. And I say that because without the group that we were traveling with, so it was the same group every week, and you were a huge part of that, it would not have been enjoyable in the least because it was the people you work with. So I love that about it.
As with everything, it's always the people, man. It's all about who you're with, not what you're doing, because that all becomes the same. I will say we were flying enough over those years that, like, the very first time I got off a plane, we were like deboarding, and I walked into the airport, and I literally had this like 15 seconds where I didn't know what city I was in, because it all becomes the same.
Right.
And it kind of freaked, like I had a bit of a panic attack over it where I was just like, I literally don't know where I'm at right now. And that's a very bizarre experience.
Yeah,
that
for sure.
a lot of people don't understand, because it just becomes a thing.
Especially when you do like a multi-city kind of thing or whatever. Yeah, you forget which city you landed in. You're trying to figure out how to get to your hotel and which hotel you're at. It's weird. So you loved Accenture. You were doing some really cool stuff, working with some pretty cool clients. Why a startup? And what was that like transition like for you? Like to say, all right, I have this idea, I want to do this thing, but at the same time, like I got this pretty good job, right?
Yep. All of those things. Yeah. So the first company that I started, Aware 3, my wife and I were attending a church north of the river here in Kansas City. It was a large, fairly progressive church. And this was in 2013. And at the time, like to be like an active member of the church, it was just kind of a mess. They had like all sorts of online tools. If you wanted to volunteer, you had to go over to this system and create a username and password and try to find a system or try to find an opportunity to volunteer. If you wanted to make a donation, you had to log into this other system. They were sending out communications, but they were going to like my old Hotmail account. Like they just sort of had this tech train wreck on their hands, which meant at the end of the day, like we weren't doing any of it. And so ended up going to one of the pastors on staff there and was like, hey, dude, we would be more involved here. We want to be more involved, but you got to make it easy on us. And we do everything through our phones. Let's start communicating to people through their phones. And that seems like a really obvious statement now, but in 2013, that wasn't as obvious. And so they ended up being our very first client. We ended up launching the Vineyard Church mobile app. And the goal of the mobile app was to be like the one-stop shop for the members of the church. So if I wanted to make a donation, I go into the app. If I want to volunteer, I go into the app. If the church needs to communicate something to me, they send it through the app. So it was just the on-ramp to all of those tools, all those communications, and we just made it easy for people to get involved. So it started there, and we were still at our day jobs. I had a technical co-founder, Joe. We were still both at Accenture at the time, just kind of like word of mouth, grinding it out. We got to like 50, 100 clients. And then it just sort of got to that point of like, man, if we're going to do this, now's the time. And again, my wife will attest to this. I didn't really have that moment of like, like the light came on. It was like, you got to go do this. The universe is telling you to do this. It just sort of was a gradual thing for me where we had clients and I knew I couldn't continue to do both. And I always play out catastrophic in my brain. Like, what's the catastrophic scenario here? And for me, catastrophic was I jump ship, I try this thing, it fails, and I go crawling back and I beg Accenture for my job back. That was catastrophic to me.
Oh, I was going to say catastrophic was they said, hell no. Like, you're not invited. Like, we're like Northwest Missouri, you're not invited back.
I've been told that before. Yeah.
So, a little bit about the Aware 3 story. So, you jump when you've got, somewhere 50, 100 customers. You make that jump. Talk to me a little bit about like what that founder experience was like to take a company from where you started to, kind of, what is it, cradle to grave, if you will.
It's bizarre. So yeah, I mean, I had a great job. I mean, I had been at Accenture for 13 years. I was being paid well. Our son was 6 months old at the time. We had a mortgage, we had car payments, we had all the things, right? And for me to walk in there one day and be like, I'm literally going to gamble all of this and give all of that up and that security up, is super scary. Not only for you, I actually always say this, and I would say this if she weren't in the room, but I actually think the harder role in that is the spouse, right? Or your significant other, because they're taking the gamble with you, but they have no control over the situation, right? They're gambling on you as well. And so I always think, I always encourage people to really give your spouse or your significant other a lot of credit in this environment, because they're on that journey with you as well. And they're not the ones that are in control making the decisions on success or failure. So anyway, so yeah, it's super scary to give up all of those things, especially when you have a 6-month-old kid and you're looking at the future and going like, I have no idea how this is going to play out. But I knew for me, I don't do what ifs very well, and I didn't want to have a what if in my life. And so I just decided, again, I think I just went to what's worst case here, and worst case was I'd go take my job, ask for my job back.
You have to go find another,
or get another job.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys jumped into this thing, and then what was the progression of Aware 3? Just kind of give me the cliff notes of the kind of progression of how that came to be.
Cliff notes. We got started and we learned a lot, and I think there were a few catalysts for us. One was Digital Sandbox. Thank you, Digital Sandbox, an amazing group here in Kansas City that is doing cool things. So they helped fund our initial integration with a CRM that's really popular in the church market, and so they gave us the dollars to do that development, and that integration with a partner out there was one of the things that just sort of lit a fire underneath Aware 3. So once we had that integration and we could go to market and say we had that, we immediately started marketing to their customer base, and they had like 5,000 nonprofits. And so our growth just did its thing at that point.
So you jumped out of the church segment specific. I mean, you still supported churches, but you were able to broaden kind of your market through that like channel relationship, basically.
Yeah. We started going into more traditional nonprofits. We started getting into some K-12 schools, things like that. Church was still the focus, but we started getting into, I say, the broader 501 nonprofit market at that point.
At what point did you decide you needed to raise money?
When sort of we were just struggling to keep up at that point, and revenue wasn't at a place yet to support us hiring a bunch of people to do that, but we could see that it was starting to happen. And so through Kevin's recommendation, I went and applied to Pipeline at that point and just sort of got introduced to the fundraising world. I knew nothing about fundraising at that point. I had never fundraised. I had no idea how it worked. I could maybe spell cap table, but like I didn't even know what a cap table was at that point. And so we learned a lot through Pipeline, and then Pipeline actually introduced us to Nelnet, which is depending on the day, a $4 billion publicly traded company in Lincoln, Nebraska. We got introduced to them. We ended up pitching Nebraska Angels. They were in the room, and then they ended up doing $1 million seed round in the company in 15. So we started in 13, kind of organically grew to 15, did $1 million seed round in 15, and then they actually ended up acquiring the company in 18. So it's sort of this just bizarre path that I could have never dreamed happening in a million years that it would go that way. But for us, it was a very unique situation that our investor was our acquirer, and that happened for a lot of reasons. But
what was the hardest thing about like that window, that 5-year window? What was the hardest thing about being a founder? Hardest thing about starting a company and then growing an organization, having a team? I know there's a lot of joy in that, and I love working with teams. I love all of those things, and I know you do too. And that was like the people was the positive. What were like the dark cloud moments for you? Like what were those things that stand out of like, wow, if I knew this, I might not have made that move. I might not have made that jump.
I think it's like managing yourself, because as the CEO of a startup, the breadth of problems that you deal with is it's deep, man. Like there's so many things going on, and trying to keep up with all of those things. And I'm not an expert in any of those things, right? Like I'm not an expert really in anything at this point. I mean, I know a little bit about sales and marketing. I know a little bit about product. I can code Java if you ever need, somebody to code Java. I can do
It's
that.
a lie. It's a lie.
For the side, I still have that book. I keep that Java book on my desk as just sort of a reminder for myself to like, that's where you came from. Like you got to keep grinding and doing that. Anyway, so like I know a little bit about a lot of things, but like you just have to know everything. And including how to plunge a toilet. We were just talking about that story, right? So I think it's just like managing your own emotions. And I consider myself a pretty mentally strong person. At least I thought I was, until I went through this process, and I ended up like having my first panic attack, when we got our first lawsuit. We got in the mail. I went and checked the mail one day, and our biggest competitor sent us a cease and desist order. And I'm like, holy crap, this is like, I don't even know what to do with this.
I don't even know an attorney.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just, it's really like keeping in mind that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and managing your own your emotional state is very, very difficult as a founder, because you're trying to help employees, you're trying to solve problems, you're trying to keep your family whole. It's just that breadth of everything that's going on.
How important was having a co-founder for you?
I wouldn't do it without it. I say this all the time. Like I actually don't know how solo founders do it. I just think, for me, I'm an external processor, and so I need that person to be able to sit down and go, "Hey, man, I'm thinking about this way. I know you're not an expert in this either, but let's bounce this around and let's figure out what the right answer is." The emotional support of when you get the cease and desist in the mail, and just having someone else to call and say like he understands what you're going through and how scary that is. Because the reality is that the number of people that can actually understand and empathize what you're going through is very small. And even, again, back to the spouse thing, it's like your spouse wants to support you and will do everything they can to support you, but they don't really understand either, because they're not the one that's going through it. And so to have that other person that is going through it and is living it and has gambled everything that you're gambling, I think I literally wouldn't do it without a co-founder. And I scored with my co-founder.
Yeah, were you guys yin yang? Were you guys like-minded? Like what was it about the dynamic with you and Joe that like made it work? Because I know a lot of co-founders struggle with that, right? They want to find someone who thinks like them, but then you don't have that maybe that diversity of thought within that partnership. How was it for you two?
So we met at Accenture, right? So just inherently, like we're sort of like-minded from that perspective.
Sure.
But Joe can actually
really
code. He can actually code Java. Yeah. I can't, maybe. So yeah, I mean, our division of labor was like, I had the business side, I had sales, marketing, support, all of those things, and he was the technical side of the house.
All right.
But we both speak each other's language. And so we were able to kind of connect the dots